most Americans were against Hitler and against Nazism in Germany, weren't they? Well, that's certainly the impression we get from watching Hollywood movies such as Saving Private Ryan or even Schindler's List or whatever. And while there's no denying that many Americans didn't like Hitler at all, in fact despised the man and hated Nazism, and it's also true that many Americans actually liked Hitler and had nothing against Nazism and against fascism in general. In fact, they kind of liked Hitler and they liked fascism, they liked Nazism. And one of the problems is that these people were actually maybe not many in number, but they were very, very important people, very influential people. They were in many ways the social, the economic, and in some ways political elite of the United States. And I'm thinking here in particular about the great captains of industry, as they say in the United States, the great industrialists, the bankers and leading lawyers of the United States, who in the 30s actually liked Hitler because, as the saying went, you could do business with Hitler. And that is indeed very, very important. To understand that, one must go back to the 1920s, to the years, the decade after the First World War, when many American companies, for reasons which we can get into right now, made big investments in Germany, which was not yet under Nazi rule. For example, Ford and General Motors established big factories, big branch plants in Germany. And so did IBM and ITT and Gillette and Coca Cola and Kodak and, I could mention many, many other companies. And they started to do business in Germany. And did they do very well? Well, the answer is no. Their business didn't go very well for quite some time because in the early 30s, well, in the late 20s already, the Great Depression broke out. And that was a major economic crisis, which was very, very bad for business all over the world. Business was bad in the United States, and business was bad in Germany. But then, in 1933, in Germany, Hitler came to power. And suddenly, things started to improve for American investments in Germany. In fact, from the moment Hitler came to power in 1933, almost immediately American investments in Germany, American branch plants in Germany, started to make more and more money. And there was good reasons for that. One reason was that Hitler eliminated all trade unions, for example. And as a result of that, companies in Germany, including foreign-owned companies, could start to pay less and less, lower and lower wages to their workers and fewer benefits. And you could make them work longer hours without having to worry about the consequences because strikes were no longer allowed in Germany. So Hitler's type of fascism, Hitler's Nazism, was actually good for business in that sense, in that it's actually curtailed the power of unions and political parties. Talk about which the Nazis threw the communists into concentration camps, and the Socialist Party no longer had any say whatsoever in the politics of the country. So in that respect, there was no problems either. So Hitler was good for business in that sense, but Hitler was even better for business in that because of Hitler, business picked up in Germany. In that Hitler ordered lots of goodies, lots of products from the American companies active in Germany. For example, he ordered lots of trucks and tanks and airplanes from companies like General Motors and Ford. And all kinds of equipment, for example, communications equipment from ITT to enable airplanes to communicate with tanks. Hitler was preparing for war, as everybody now knows. And Hitler needed war material. He needed trucks, planes, and so forth. And these big American companies in Germany were very glad to provide that to Mr. Hitler. And contrary to what some people believe, that Hitler, for example, was a kind of communist who simply nationalized everything and didn't pay the bill, that's not true. Hitler did pay the bills. So business picked up in Germany big time. In fact, in Germany, big American corporations did better business than they did in the United States itself. And you didn't have to have branch plants in Germany to do business with Hitler. You could also export to Germany directly. For example, the big American petroleum trusts like Exxon, then known as Standard Oil of New Jersey, owned by the Rockefeller family, and Texaco supplied Hitler with all kinds of gas. Because Hitler was stockpiling gas. Obviously, if you want to wage a war involving Stuka airplanes and thousands of tanks rolling towards Warsaw or Paris or wherever, you need lots of gas. And I'll have you know that in Germany, while there's lots of beer and I guess water, there's no gas. So the gas you need to wage war, you have to import. And Hitler bought the gas from American sources, mostly. Not exclusively, mostly from American sources. So business with Hitler was very, very good business. Arming Hitler to the teeth was very good business. And when you would have asked an American captain of industry, such as Henry Ford, for example, in 1938, Mr. Ford, you're selling weapons to Hitler, you're selling trucks and tanks to Hitler. You know, don't you think Hitler is going to use that material to wage war against some country? The answer would have been, of course there's going to be a war. But everybody who was in the know knew and expected that that war that Hitler for sure would unleash would be a war against the Soviet Union. And that was a great thing, because most American industrialists and bankers and so on hated the Soviet Union a hell of a lot more than they hated Nazi Germany. Because in the Soviet Union, they were working on constructing a socialist society, a kind of counter system to the capitalist system, for which the United States is famous, and which of course is a system that had produced the captains of industry, and from which the captains of industry of the United States were profiting. So actually Hitler was a wonderful guy, wasn't he? If you think about it. You made money thanks to Hitler. And Hitler, in the war we would have to unleash, would actually end up destroying the Soviet Union, which was the one country in the whole world that you hated the most. So Hitler's plans for war was nothing that we had anything against. In fact, when the war broke out in the United States, that elite of industrialists and bankers were not unhappy at all. And when Hitler's tanks rolled into Poland and later on into Belgium and France, that was not a big deal to them at all. In fact, in June 1940, there was a big celebration in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, where the German consul invited all kinds of people to help celebrate the victories of the German army in the Low Countries against Poland and above all against France. And who was there? For example, Edsel Ford, the son of Henry Ford, and representatives of General Motors and ITT, who had helped him to win his victories. Because Hitler's warfare was blitzkrieg warfare, lightning fast warfare, involving planes and tanks and trucks moving really fast. Well, most of that equipment, if you think about it, or much of it anyways, was supplied by American companies, either active in Germany via branch plants, or supplying Germany directly, via, for example, via fuel, petrol, gas, oil, shipped in to Germany, either directly from the United States or via Mexico. So business with Hitler was wonderful business, and there was no reason whatsoever to dislike Hitler. In fact, if you would have said to Mr. Ford, you're doing business with Hitler, and we understand that you're happy about that because you make lots of money in Germany, but don't you think Hitler is an awful anti-Semite and a racist? Don't you dislike Hitler because of that? Well, the answer would have been no, because Mr. Ford himself was a notorious anti-Semite. And anti-Semitism was widespread in the high circles of society in the United States, and of course so was racism. So the fact that Hitler was an anti-Semite and was a racist was of no concern whatsoever. What he did to his Jews, was really no problem whatsoever for the big captains of industry in the United States. So war breaks out, and the war at first produces all kinds of German victories, but then later on German victories sort of end. Britain doesn't give up, and the war is stalling, and it looks like it could last many more years. But that's no problem to the United States, because in fact the war itself is wonderful for business. Not only are we making money by selling equipment to the Germans, but since the British are holding out and need our products to continue to wage war, we now supply the British as well. And we can now supply all kinds of weapons and planes to the British, who are fighting the Germans, with our equipment as well. So actually war is wonderful because we're supplying all enemies with weapons and make money in the process. And in the meantime, the United States itself is rearming, and we make money producing weapons there as well. And in fact, war is wonderful. War means business like never before. In fact, it's fair to say that it's the war that pulled the United States out of the Great Depression, and not Mr. Roosevelt's New Deal, as some historians still like to think or pretend to believe. So war was wonderful. And the longer the war lasted, the better. In fact, there's some notorious statements by politicians and industrialists like Harry Truman and Henry Ford saying that this war, basically, the longer it lasts, the better for us.